called as a gambit in chess. Gambit is often the opening move of chess. So in chess, how you make your move is by seeing your opponent, by seeing what he thinks, and by deciding on his weakness, by seeing his weak move. So you see your opponent, you decide what is his weak move, and then counter that move with your move. That is chess, and that is a gambit. So an intelligent move which will tilt the table towards the odds in your favor. The same thing is done in arrhythmias. So in arrhythmias, the management protocol or the approach is called as the Sicilian gambit. So Sicilian gambit, because a group of electrophysiologists or decision policymakers decided to sit in Sicily, and then they formed this approach of Sicilian gambit. So basically, what it says is, so you decide in arrhythmia not by it's not a situation wherein it's like a one drug, one arrhythmia. So there's no like one drug for one arrhythmia. So how do you deal with an arrhythmia is by seeing first the mechanism of arrhythmia. So whenever you see an arrhythmia, be an SVT, be an atrial tachycardia, be it a VT, or be it VPCs, see what is the underlying mechanism. See if you can understand the mechanism. Then once you know the mechanism, see what is the vulnerable parameter. We say something called as vulnerable parameter, which you can target. So, there are each arrhythmia or each mechanism has got a vulnerable parameter which you can target. So based on these two, you select your drug. So that is called as the gambit approach. You select your drug based on the mechanism of arrhythmia and based on the vulnerable parameter. So, you'll all be surprised, no matter what the arrhythmia is, there are only three mechanisms mainly. So automaticity, triggered activity, and re-entry. We have read this again and again, probably since pharmacology, and one of the worst chapters, anti-arrhythmic drugs in pharmacology. But I'm not sure how many of you have really understood it. Even I've come to understand of this, this mechanism and approach of late only. So I'll just take you through and share my thoughts of what I think about this. So about the mechanism of arrhythmias. So first thing is enhanced automaticity. First mechanism. So this is a normal sinus node or a pacemaker cell. So I'll just use the laser pointer. So this is the pacemaker cell action potential. So in the pacemaker cell, what determines automaticity, what is different from non-pacemaker cells is the phase 4. So phase 4, spontaneous depolarization in phase 4 makes it a pacemaker cells. Obviously, the upslope of a pacemaker cell is also different, because the ion channel responsible for the depolarization in a pacemaker cell is calcium. It's the L-type calcium channel, but not the usual sodium channel which are seen in non-pacemaker cells. So what decides this spontaneous depolarization? Two ions. Mainly, it is a type of sodium ion called as a funny current. Funny current, or IF, it's called funny because it gets activated during hyperpolarization. Whenever the membrane potential becomes more negative, the ion gets activated, and that is responsible for depolarization. Another ion in pacemaker cell which is responsible for this phase 4 is a calcium current. Again, a T-type calcium current, through that. So these two currents mainly responsible for phase 4 depolarization. So, anything, what you realize is there's a threshold potential and there's a maximum diastolic potential or the membrane potential, which is, the more negative it is, the more stable the cell. The more positive the, membrane diastolic potential, more likely it will get depolarized early. Same way with the threshold. The higher the threshold, the more stable it is. The lower the threshold, moment it reaches the threshold, the cell will trigger off an action potential. And third thing is the slope. So, the more slow the slope, the more stable or the slower the cell will fire. The more rapid the slope or, rapid upstroke, the more chances that the heart rate will increase. So, what we realize is in automaticity, the vulnerable part is the slope, is the phase 4 depolarization. So anything that affects the slope is likely to worsen the arrhythmia or likely to subside the arrhythmia. So what are the things that affect the slope? One I said is the threshold voltage. And what can lower this threshold, make it more susceptible to fire? Mainly electrolyte abnormalities. You see hypokalemia, this membrane potential, the depolarization or the negativity is decided by sodium current and potassium current. So, you would have realized in clinical settings, during hypokalemia, you see lots of VPCs, ectopics, APCs, and all those things. That's because the cells are starting to fire. They're becoming more and more automatic. And one of the reasons is because of the threshold potential has lowered down. It becomes easy for cells to fire. So, the way to target this is when you think that is the cause, you have to reduce make it more stable. So in which case, what you'll do is, you'll correct the potassium so that the cell becomes more stable. The other thing which can affect the phase 4 is the slope of the phase 4 is the sympathetic drive. The autonomic tone decides this phase 4. So that's why whenever you're when there's an adrenergic surge, when you're running or exercise or something like that, the phase 4 becomes more steep and your heart rate increases. So obviously phase 4 is decided by the autonomic drive. So that's why many of these automatic arrhythmias are triggered by adrenergic drive. That's why you'll find automatic arrhythmia. You'll find a lot of atrial fibrillation, atrial tachycardia during episodes of pneumonias, during febrile episodes, during thyrotoxicosis episodes, and during exercise. Many of these autonomic arrhythmias, patients will say that I have palpitations during exercise. That's because whenever the heart rate goes high, the adrenergic drive increases. The slope increases and they start firing off. So it's a classic, pointer, that anything triggered by more adrenergic drive is likely to be automatic in nature. So, and that's the thing. That's the vulnerable parameter also. So when you have an automatic arrhythmia in hand, you have to target this vulnerable parameter, which is phase 4. So what you use is, one, you stabilize the membrane potential, make sure that hypokalemia is corrected, make sure that there is nothing which can lower the membrane potential. Second is reduce the slope, make the slope as less as possible. That is by blunting the adrenergic drive. That's why whenever we see an automatic arrhythmia, your target approach should be to reduce phase 4. That's why we use in automatic arrhythmia a lot of beta blockade. So beta blockade would blunt the sympathetic drive, would blunt the adrenergic tone, and then would reduce the firing of an automatic arrhythmia. So that's how the mechanism of arrhythmia, the vulnerable parameter, and then you target the vulnerable parameter. So in an automatic arrhythmia, what's the problem, and you choose drugs which can reduce phase 4 slope, that is beta blockade. So next coming to, so this is the same thing. Next coming to triggered activity, the second mechanism. Triggered activity is nothing but a calcium mediated process. So what happens, calcium is an intracellular ion. In pacemaker cells, calcium is entering during the phase 0. So, but in non-pacemaker cells, calcium enters the cells mainly during phase 2 and in phase 4. Phase 4 is pure diastole. You realize that this is diastole. Phase 0 is diastole. From phase 1 onwards, it represents repolarization. It's not diastole, sorry, depolarization, and this is repolarization. So calcium enters the cell during stage 2 and stage 4. So suppose there's a calcium problem in stage 2, and it need not be a direct calcium problem. It might be actually a potassium problem. So that repolarization is decided by potassium. So a depolarization current is sodium, repolarization current is potassium. So potassium going outward is supposed to cause repolarization. But suppose you have a potassium channel abnormality. For some reason, potassium is unable to exit the cell. What happens is the action potential becomes prolonged, and that allows more and more calcium to enter. And calcium entering again would worsen this repolarization, making the action potential prolonged. So this calcium overload causes EADs. EADs or DADs are nothing but membrane oscillations in the early state in phase 3 or phase 4. So these membrane oscillations, when they are significant enough, they can trigger off an action potential. They can trigger off an arrhythmia. So in the same way, an EAD or a DAD, when it is insignificant, they just remain as membrane oscillations. But suppose they are significant enough, they reach the threshold potential. Once they reach the threshold potential, they trigger off an action potential, and they can trigger off an arrhythmia. So that is how EADs and DADs occur. And what you realize is both of them are calcium dependent. So the mechanism. One important thing is, you realize that for EADs, you should have an action potential duration which is long. A prolonged action potential duration is the forerunner of an EAD. So whenever the action potential duration is too long, so that calcium entry then can trigger off an EAD. So unlike in DAD, the action potential duration is absolutely normal. It is just a calcium abnormality in phase 4, so that calcium enters the cell during phase 4, causing diastolic calcium waves, which trigger off arrhythmias. So an important clue to find out an EAD mechanism is a prolonged action potential. An action potential prolongation is seen in the ECG as a QT prolongation. So whenever you have QT prolongation and you have an arrhythmia, more likely the arrhythmia is because of EADs, early after depolarization. So, and it's a calcium mediated, mainly a calcium mediated and a QT mediated arrhythmia. So QT prolongation is a very, very important factor. So next time you see an arrhythmia, you would have realized that in whenever there's a long QT, or whenever because of hypokalemia you have QT prolongation, you'll find the short coupled VPCs. So short coupled ectopies are nothing but early after depolarizations. So whenever the QT is too long and the membrane potential is lower, these early after depolarizations can trigger off, and you get a ventricular ectopic. So those are nothing but short coupled present as short coupled VPCs. So whereas in DADs, the QT interval is absolutely normal. It's just a genetic abnormality which results in calcium overload. There are certain arrhythmias which are very, very characteristics of DAD, like outflow tract tachycardias. Many of these outflow tract tachycardias are because of triggered activities. Certain arrhythmias have a definite mechanism. Mainly these, outflow tract tachycardias tend to be because of, DADs. Sometimes some of these atrial tachycardias tend to be because of triggered activity. Now, once we know the mechanism, we'll find the vulnerable parameter. So here, the vulnerable parameter is obviously the action potential duration or the QT prolongation. So you should target the action potential duration or the QT prolongation. So use drugs what shorten the QT interval. We will discuss about that. Second thing, and we also know that hypokalemia definitely causes QT prolongation. So whenever you see an EAD or something, make sure that you stabilize the membrane, that you shorten the QT interval, and by giving him magnesium or potassium so that the QT interval becomes narrow. So your target when you see an EAD related arrhythmia or a QT prolongation related arrhythmia should be shorten the QT. There are very few drugs which shorten the QT, but one of the most commonest cause for QT prolongation is hypokalemia or hypomagnesemia, and so it is absolutely necessary or imperative that you correct the potassium and magnesium whenever you see an EAD related arrhythmia. In DAD related arrhythmia, you should have a hunch that this is a DAD related arrhythmia. As I told you, that certain arrhythmias are known for DAD related arrhythmias. So in them, your target should be to reduce the invert calcium. So use a calcium channel blocker to reduce the diastolic calcium. So that that's why you see more of this outflow tract tachycardias. The treatment of choice is a calcium channel blocker, because what a calcium channel blocker does is it reduces this DADs, and that's why it terminates in arrhythmia. Another interesting thing is, this EADs and DADs both are worsened by catecholamines. So you have to blunt catecholamines also. So catecholamines can worsen both EADs and DADs, more so with DADs. So one of the things what you should do in DAD related arrhythmia is blunt catecholamines. One more interesting thing is, many of these DADs related to catecholamines are sensitive to adenosine. So you wouldn't be surprised that many of the ventricular arrhythmias, like outflow tract tachycardias in the ventricle, which are not because of calcium inflow, but because of catecholamines, will respond to adenosine. They are called as adenosine sensitive VTs or adenosine sensitive atrial tachycardias. So even atrial tachycardia, not only AV node dependent, even otherwise, atrial tachycardias, some of them which have triggered mechanism, and the trigger is nothing but catecholamines which increase the diastolic calcium, those will respond to adenosine. So it's a worthwhile drug. Sometimes we use adenosine even for RVOT VTs also. Not all of them. If the RVOT VT is because of a calcium invert current because of phase 4, it won't. But if it is because of calcium entry because of increased catecholamine sensitivity, then definitely it might respond. Okay. So the third mechanism is nothing but re-entry. So in re-entry, what happens is re-entry can occur around this one, what about anatomical obstacle or a functional obstacle. So typically what happens in re-entry is you have two pathways, one this way and one that way. So and sometimes what will happen is an onward impulse will find one of these in blocked for some reason. So the impulse goes around that, and then when it comes in the reverse direction, this is now not refractory, and it can trigger off an re-entry. So this might occur around the anatomical barrier, or it might be a functional barrier. Anatomical barrier, for example, an AV node and a pathway. So you have a WPW where you have an accessory pathway over here, and then you have an AV node. So sometimes an ectopic will find the accessory pathway refractory. It will come down the AV node and go up the accessory pathway and can trigger off a re-entry. But so that's why re-entries are very, it's a mechanism of arrhythmia in orthodromic AVRTs, antidromic AVRTs, even for that matter in AVNRT, wherein you have two pathways within the AV node. Whereas sometimes you need not have an anatomical pathway. You might have a functional pathway, like you have a scar, you have a myocardial infarction. In a myocardial infarction, what happens is the scarred area has got heterogeneous conduction. The conduction is very slow within the scar. Around the scar, the conduction is very fast. And this heterogeneous conduction within the scar and around the scar can trigger off a re-entry mechanism. Okay, so what is the vulnerable parameter in re-entry? That is something called as an excitable gap. So in a re-entry, there are two things: one, a leading edge, and a trailing edge. So the leading edge goes on depolarizing the tissue, whereas the trailing edge, the tissue begins to repolarize. So here you have a tissue which is non-refractory between the leading edge and trailing edge. So this non-refractory tissue makes the re-entry possible. Suppose this tissue becomes refractory, by the time the leading edge reaches here, it's refractory, it stops. So the arrhythmia terminates. So the vulnerable parameter in a re-entry circuit is nothing but an excitable gap. And how do you make this excitable gap very small or vanish this excitable gap is increasing the refractoriness of the tissues. So if you increase the refractoriness of this excitable tissue, by the time the depolarizing current reaches there, it's completely refractory, it stops. The other way around is slowing conduction. Depressed conduction so slow that here by the time this leading edge comes, this is still conducting very, very slowly, and it abolishes. So two ways of abolishing this one, what it's a re-entry circuit is one, depress conduction very, very slow. Depressing conduction will work in rapid conducting circuits, okay, or you increase refractoriness. So these two are the vulnerable parameters which can be addressed. So this is how we decide on the mechanism of arrhythmia and how to target. What are the vulnerable parameters? I hope you got it. What are the vulnerable parameters in each mechanism and how to target? Now, a brief on antiarrhythmic drugs. Okay, so this one, what this one. I know antiarrhythmics is very boring. I will not go through the entire thing of antiarrhythmics. I'll just tell you what is relevant. So we've already discussed this action potential. I told you calcium is responsible for phase 0 in pacemaker cells. Calcium is also responsible for phase 4 in pacemaker cells. Okay, sodium is the main invert ion, and sodium is mainly seen in phase 0 during depolarization. In most non-pacemaker cells, depolarization is caused by sodium. So and then this one, potassium is a repolarization current. So repolarization is caused by potassium. So we know for sure that if you use a sodium channel blocker, and if you remember in the Vaughan-Williams classification, sodium channel blockers are class 1 drugs. So what a sodium channel blocker does is it acts on phase 0 of the action potential. What it does, it slows down the phase 0. So it slows conduction, it slows down the phase 0, and and thereby it reduces slows down the conduction. But one side effect of slowing down conduction is it can prolong the action potential duration. So it can prolong the action potential duration. That's why some of these sodium channel blockers can also cause, I told you the correlate of action potential duration is QT prolongation. So sodium channel blockers can not only cause slowing conduction, can also cause QT prolongation. And I told you earlier that the QRS complex or the depolarization ends at phase 0. From phase 1, it is repolarization. So that's how sodium channel blockers work. They depress conduction, but they can also prolong repolarization, which is not a bad thing. I told you prolonging repolarization is nothing but prolonging refractoriness. This is refractory period. Okay, this is the relative absolute refractory period. This is relative refractory period. So if you prolong action potential duration, you're actually prolonging refractoriness, which may be beneficial. But if you prolong action potential duration too long, you might trigger off EADs. You might have EAD-related arrhythmias. You might have torsades pontis. So that's a catch-22 like situation. So based on the sense, based on the relative efficacy for both these actions, sodium channel blockers are further divided into 3 classes: 1A, 1B, and 1C. 1A, you have quinidine, procainamide, disopyramide. So 1A drugs reduce the action potential duration. Reduce the slope of phase 0, and they also prolong action potential duration. So once they prolong action potential duration, they are at risk of QT prolongation. 1B drugs, of which lignocaine is a part, they reduce the slope, but not to a greater extent. They're not, see, if you see here, this is 1A, it reduces the slope and it prolongs the action potential duration. This is 1B in blue. So, it's not that potent a drug. It doesn't reduce the slope too much. To a certain extent, yes, but it shortens the QT interval. It is QT neutral. It doesn't have any action on the QT interval. So that is beneficial. That's why lignocaine is QT neutral. It doesn't prolong the, QT interval because it doesn't prolong the action potential duration. 1C drug, you have flecainide. That is a very potent, antiarrhythmic because it slows down conduction to a great extent. At the same time, it can prolong repolarization also, especially flecainide, because flecainide has got potassium channel blockade action also. So it can prolong repolarization. Other 1C drugs do not increase action potential duration to a great extent, except for flecainide. But, that's the thing. When you're using flecainide, because the conduction system is so depressed, your QRS interval, QRS duration can be worsened. That's why when you're giving flecainide, you have to monitor the QRS duration because conduction is so depressed, your QRS can become wide, and that is one of the signs of, say, flecainide toxicity, where you have to reduce the dose. So, and that's another reason why 1A and 1C drugs both were removed from trials, because they prolong the QT interval and tend to cause torsades de pointes. That's why as prophylactic therapy in post-MI, where they were initially tried in CAST and all those things, they were withdrawn because of the QT prolongation properties. So we all know the action of beta blockade, calcium channel blockers, and potassium channel blockers. I told you in phase 3, they act on phase 3. They prolong the action potential duration, and to a great extent, how it works is by increasing refractory period. So whatever increases refractory period is good, especially for re-entry arrhythmias. So now let's see, knowing the basic mechanism of antiarrhythmic drugs, let's see where are they useful, in which arrhythmias, or what properties of antiarrhythmic drugs are useful. So 1A drugs, quinidine, procainamide, disopyramide, sodium channel blockers, they, as I said, they delay phase 0. They prolong action potential duration. So the favorable effects are they reduce conduction. So, because they prolong phase zero, they reduce conduction velocity. And because they prolong the action potential duration, they increase refractoriness. So both these things would target vulnerable parameter in re-entry. So I told you in re-entry arrhythmias, the way to terminate a re-entry arrhythmia is either you make the tissue completely refractory, so you increase refractoriness, which a sodium channel blocker does, or you depress conduction. You depress conduction to a great extent that by the time the leading front comes, the conduction is still, the tissue is still not recovered. So it's still, refractory, and it becomes. So both these properties would make it useful for re-entry arrhythmias. So that's why you use 1A drugs in re-entry. But there's a downside. If refractoriness increases too much, action potential increases too much, then you'll cause QT prolongation. And many of these drugs are not used in India. 1B drug, of which you have lignocaine and mexiletine. So the same way, they reduce phase zero, but not to a great extent. They shorten the action potential duration. That's why they're QT neutral. And because they reduce phase zero, they reduce conduction velocity. So they may be used in re-entry. At least they have part of the action required for re-entry arrhythmias. That's why lignocaine is used in re-entry. But you realize one thing, all of you answered amiodarone before lignocaine. Why amiodarone before lignocaine? Because lignocaine doesn't have anything on refractoriness. It doesn't increase the refractoriness at all. That's why it's less potent and antiarrhythmic, except in one clinical situation, in ischemia. In ischemia, lignocaine works differently, and I'll give you the reason later. Okay, so anyways, by and large, but mexiletine is not the other way around. Mexiletine works very well in re-entry. So it can be used for re-entry. Another thing is, because it's QT neutral, lignocaine can be used for EAD-related arrhythmias. So I told you in EAD-related arrhythmias, the main problem is the QT interval. So you have to reduce the QT interval. And I told you, I'll tell you a drug which reduces the QT interval. Sometimes, not to a great extent, but you can try lignocaine. So when you have long QT because of hypokalemia or anything else, or because of ischemia-induced QT prolongation causing EADs and torsades or VF. So, that's why you use lignocaine, because lignocaine is QT neutral and not amiodarone. Okay. But this QT neutral effect it won't work to a great extent in EADs, but definitely if you have to choose an antiarrhythmic in EADs, maybe you can use lignocaine. That's why even in congenital LQTs, you use mexiletine because it is QT shortening. 1C drugs, flecainide and enconite, they reduce the phase zero and they produce action potential prolongation, especially flecainide, because it has got potassium channel blockade. Another very interesting action of flecainide is flecainide reduces diastolic calcium. In many studies, flecainide has shown to work for triggered activity also, because it reduces diastolic calcium waves. And that's why, many of these outflow tract tachycardias, which are because of calcium dependent, we use flecainide a lot because it has got anti-calcium effect also, despite being a sodium channel blocker. So, the desired effects is reduced conduction velocity and increased refractoriness, because it prolongs the action potential, it increases refractoriness. So definitely it can be used for re-entry arrhythmias, but we don't use flecainide in re-entry arrhythmias in the ventricle, because I told you that, it depresses conduction to a great extent. So it produces QRS prolongation, it can cause heart blocks, etc. So we don't use flecainide for ventricular arrhythmias so much. They're very good for re-entry arrhythmias in the atria, flecainide, because there, this one, it works much better. So, and some of these antiarrhythmics have got preferential action for the atria and ventricle. So, because the action potential duration in the atria is different from that of the ventricle, it's shorter. So, some of this, based on the binding properties to the sodium channels, they preferentially act on the atria and ventricle. Like lignocaine has absolutely no action on the atria. It doesn't act on short action potential duration. It acts only on long action potential. That's why it works very well in the ventricles. Whereas some of the sodium channel blockers are preferential for the atria. So beta blockers, we all know, it reduces phase 4. I already explained this. So a favorable effect is it reduces automaticity. So it should be the drug of choice in automatic arrhythmias. So amiodarone, sotalol, and bretylium, they are potassium channel blockers. So what they do is prolongation of phase 3 prolongation, increase refractoriness. So all these potassium channel blockers will prolong phase 3, and the byproduct of that is increased refractoriness. And because they increase refractoriness, they are very good in re-entry arrhythmias. So, that's why we use left, right, and center amiodarone in ventricular tachycardias, which are re-entry. So when there's a ventricular tachycardia because of re-entry, so you have to target this refractoriness or conduction. If you have to target conduction, use a sodium channel blocker. If you have to target refractoriness, use amiodarone. Amiodarone will make the tissue completely refractory and terminate a re-entry. One thing I should tell you about amiodarone has got all 4 class action. It has got class 1 action, class 2 action, class 3 action, class 4 action. So, you really do not know which mechanism of amiodarone is working. That's why amiodarone can work in almost all arrhythmias. But it is the last drug to be used because of its toxicity profile. Okay. And that's another thing about this Vaughan-Williams classification. Let me complete with calcium channel blockers. So calcium channel blockers reduce intracellular calcium in phase 2 and phase 4. So obviously they are of choice in triggered activity. But I told you that calcium channel blockers, calcium current is also required for phase 4 of pacemaker cells. So they can be used for automaticity also. So another thing about this is you can see where newer drugs come into place. So, in automatic arrhythmias, like beta blockade, along with beta blockade, some of the, I told you automaticity is because of phase 4, and the ions driving phase 4 are nothing but, calcium ions and funny current. So if you use ivabradine, which works specifically on funny currents, so, many of these automatic arrhythmias might come down. That's why, there are case reports of ivabradine be used for automatic ATs. So you see an atrial tachycardia, especially in kids, and it's automatic. So you can as well try ivabradine, because automaticity is because of funny currents and because of calcium and because of reduced slope of phase 4. So along with beta blockade, you can also try ivabradine, but it's only in a subset of automatic atrial tachycardias that ivabradine works. But ivabradine came into work because of that, because we knew the mechanism, we knew what are the ions responsible, and you could use a target for that. Okay, so I was telling you about Vaughan-Williams classification. It's a completely heterogeneous classification. That's why the gambit came into picture. So, class 1 drugs are sodium channel blockers. They're ion blockers. Class 2 is a receptor antagonist. So it's not an ion blocker, it's a receptor antagonist. Class 3 drugs have a common property. You see, sotalol, bretylium, amiodarone has got multiple effects, but they have one common property, that is action potential prolongation. They all prolong action potential duration and they prolong refractoriness. Class 4 is again a receptor blocker. So it's not a homogeneous classification, it's a heterogeneous classification. It was done for convenience, but has got little clinical use. So, in choosing a drug, we have little clinical use. And you have to resort to a gambit approach, wherein you see the mechanism of arrhythmia, you see the vulnerable parameter, and pick up one of these drugs from this Vaughan-Williams classification, which can address that parameter, vulnerable parameter. Now, I told you about the mechanism, and I told you briefly about the antiarrhythmics. So finally, we'll talk about, this one, pointers to antiarrhythmic mechanism. So how do you clinically see when, there are certain times when you see an arrhythmia and this is going to be automatic, and this is going to be triggered, and this is going to be re-entry. What are the clinical pointers to an arrhythmia mechanism? See, both automaticity and triggered activity are sensitive to catecholamines. I already told you this. That's why both these arrhythmias, triggered activity and automatic, are provoked by exercise. So many of these patients, like RVOT-VTs, triggered arrhythmias, they say that during exercise. That's why for RVOT-VTs, we do treadmill tests to bring it on. So many of them say that they were exercising, or that's when they got it. Or when we do a TMT, many of these arrhythmias are brought on because they're automatic. That's why they are brought on by TMT. Many of them are brought on by emotion. That's why you'll have palpitation during emotions, because it could be automatic, or by thyrotoxicosis, febrile episodes. And they reproduced on a treadmill test. Both automatic and trigger. Another important feature about this automatic and triggered arrhythmia, how you can pick up, is they occur in bursts. Both automatic and triggered, they come in bursts. So if you see an ECG, or if you see a Holter, you will have few minutes of arrhythmia, quiescence, few minutes of arrhythmia, quiescence. So you'll have multiple episodes. If you've seen triggered activity like RVOT Holters, you'll have several episodes, hundreds of episodes of RVOT VTs in a day. So that is because this on and off this thing mechanism is very, very suggestive of a triggered or an automatic. It says that it is very sensitive to adrenergic drive. It keeps on coming several times in a day. But the classical feature of automaticity, if you have to see, is something called as a warm-up phenomena or a cool-down phase. So automatic arrhythmia, usually the rate is slightly slower in the beginning, or it tends to wobble a little bit. It's not static. If you see re-entry, every beat has the same cycle length or the same rate. With automatic arrhythmia, this heart rate varies in the beginning, a little bit. It's called as a warm-up. So it slowly increases, 150, 160, 170, 180, then it goes to 200, very fast. And then same way it cools down also. It slowly comes down. If you see this thing, if you see this on a Holter or something, there's a warm-up phenomena, cool-down phenomena, you're very, very sure it's automaticity. Otherwise, it's very, very difficult to differentiate automaticity from triggered activity, because both of them have the common triggers. Both of them are triggered by catecholamines. Both of them come in bursts and go off in bursts. But if you see a warm-up or something like that, you're sure it's an enhanced automaticity. So I told you about triggered activity related to EADs. So, whenever, for that, the clue is the QT prolongation. Whenever you see a QT prolongation on ECG with short-coupled VPCs, you know for sure this is, EAD-related arrhythmia. And for a re-entry, you require a substrate, or you require an endocrine barrier. So if you have a bypass tract, if you have a patient with WPW who develops a what is a regular tachycardia, it's a re-entry. And if you have AVNRT, also the same thing. But if it's a ventricular tachycardia, when you suspect a re-entry, when you have a substrate. So ventricular tachycardia in a patient with an old inferior wall MI, old anterior wall MI, there's a substrate for a scar. And this scar should be facilitating a re-entry. Your substrate is very, very important for facilitating re-entry. Another useful tool, sometimes despite all these things, based on the ECG and clinically, we are not able to differentiate the exact mechanism, especially in atrial tachycardias. You do not know whether they are automatic atrial tachycardias or whether they are flutters or something like that. So, one very good tool is to see the response to direct current cardioversion. You cardiovert the patient when you're in doubt. If it's a re-entry, definitely it will terminate. So, a re-entry arrhythmia responds very well to cardioversion, whereas automatic arrhythmia does not. If it's an automatic arrhythmia, that's why sometimes we get calls saying for atrial tachycardias we have cardioverted several times, arrhythmia is running. It is running because it's not a re-entry. It will not work. So only re-entry arrhythmias will respond to cardioversion. And automatic arrhythmia, that's another reason why you need to know the mechanism of arrhythmia. Because if it's an automatic arrhythmia or something, no matter how many times you cardioverse, it is not going to come down. Because for automatic arrhythmias, you need to suppress automaticity. You need antiarrhythmic drugs. So cardioversion will not work. Cardioversion will just depolarize the entire heart for once. And because it does that, any re-entry will stop. So if the jaw is given is good, re-entry arrhythmias definitely respond to cardioversion, whereas automatic arrhythmias won't. Moment the re-entry is over, the automaticity starts off again. You need to suppress automaticity either with drugs or by radio frequency ablation. So very, very good tool is to try cardioversion, and that's again, and I'm re-emphasizing the same thing. It's very, very important to know the mechanism of arrhythmia so that you can use appropriate therapy. So I think that is about theory. Now we'll just, in the next half an hour, if possible, we'll just go through a few case scenarios. I've got 7 scenarios in detail, in total, sorry, and we'll just see how much you have understood. So what I would like to see is, I'll give you an ECG and I'll give you the options. I'll put my chat on. So, this one, I would like all of you to participate and give me your answers by suggestions. And if anyone wants to answer, we can unmute them. So if anyone wants to try why they, give me their suggestion as to why they're using that, we can, you raise your hand. There's, I think in one of these things, you can raise a hand. And Mahendra, how do you raise a hand? In which of this? Can you tell us? Mahendra, are you there?
Yeah, doctor. Just they have to go to this attendee participant icon. No? Have an option, the raised hand. Just they have to click on the icon.
Okay, so what we will do is, all of you can give your answers through chat. Anyone who wants to try this, attempt this, or give me his viewpoint why he's using this, can raise your hand. Okay, and then we'll unmute you and you can give me your answer. Okay, so this is the first question. Select the appropriate antiarrhythmic drug, whether you will use a calcium channel blocker, beta blocker, adenosine, or any of the above. To start off in an easy one, you don't always have to answer it. So this is the first one. So which drug will you use? So which drug will you use? So let's get some response for this.
Yeah, just a minute, sir. I got one response.
I think I've not got any response here.
There was a one hand I think came down now.
Okay, someone said D. Anyone? So someone says anyone wants to answer this? This is a simple one. Okay, I'll answer this myself. I'm not getting any hand. Is there anyone who's interested? Mahendra?
No, sir. Nobody is raising hand, but they're
okay. Fine. Doesn't matter. We'll go
in the chat.
I think there's a varied reply. Adenosine, beta blocker, etc. So we'll see what is it. So here you're seeing sinus rhythm, sinus tachycardia. Here you're seeing an ectopic triggering of narrow QRS. This is a narrow QRS tachycardia with a short interval. I have marked retrograde T. So Mahendra, please mute yourself, no?
Yeah.
This is a narrow QRS regular tachycardia with a short RP interval. So moment it's a narrow QRS regular tachycardia, it is AV node dependent. So if it's a narrow QRS irregular tachycardia, it's above the AV node. So like an atrial flutter, atrial tachycardia, where the circuit is running in the atria, AV node is only an innocent bystander. So most of these arrhythmias come as irregular. Whereas anything which is regular is AV node dependent. It has to be either an AVNRT or AVRT. So you know the mechanism. Here the mechanism is a re-entry. And so it's very, very clear the mechanism, because it's regular, it has to be AV node dependent. If it's, and see, take for example an atrial fibrillation or atrial flutter, the circuit is running in the atria and everything is passing through the AV node. And atrial tachycardia or atrial flutter might run at around 250, 280 beats per minute. But AV node will allow only at around 125, 150 beats per minute. So the arrhythmia will appear irregular. So any irregular narrow QRS tachycardia is above the AV node. A regular narrow QRS tachycardia is very likely to be AV node dependent. AV node is a part of the circuit, and this is a circuitous tachycardia. So it is circuitry. Here the mechanism of arrhythmia is circuit. And now what is the vulnerable parameter? The vulnerable parameter here is the AV node. This is either an AVNRT or an AVRT. We cannot be 100% sure, but definitely the AV node is a part of the circuit. I'm sure all of you agree. So we need to target the AV node. And how will you target the AV node? So by using an AV node sensitive drug. So the best drug to use would be adenosine. Whoever gets adenosine, gets it right. But it's not wrong, theoretically at least, to use either beta blocker or calcium channel blocker. So for prophylaxis, that's why in narrow QRS tachycardia, which are AV node dependent, we use beta blocker or calcium channel blocker for prophylaxis, because if you suppress conduction in the AV node, definitely, these tachycardias won't be recurring so fast. Okay, so that's how you see the mechanism. You see the vulnerable parameter here. Definitely, vulnerable parameter is the AV node conduction. So anything that works on the AV node will work. The best drug to work on the AV node for an acute setting would be adenosine. For a chronic setting would be beta blocker or calcium channel blockers. So all of them are right. So scenario 2, 60-year-old one with worsening breathlessness since 3 weeks. So select the appropriate antiarrhythmic. So 60-year-old with worsening breathlessness. So whether you use amiodarone, lignocaine, ibutylide, or calcium channel blockers. So this is the ECG. Whether you use amiodarone, lignocaine, calcium channel blockers, or ibutylide. So we'll take 30 seconds for this, for you all to reply. And I really wish someone would attempt here. So instead of it being unilateral, so someone says you ibutylide.
Webinar lo unna phone bete.
I'm getting a lot of answers for ibutylide. I forgot the options myself. Someone says it's calcium channel blockers, ibutylide. So does anyone want to answer this? Mahendra, have you got any hands raised? Mahendra?
One person has raised the hand.
Yeah, we can unmute him.
Yeah, sir, done.
Yeah, please introduce yourself. Oh.
There is a Roshini, I think.
Roshni, do you want to give the answer? Yeah, Roshni.
Calcium channel blockers.
Why do you think you should use calcium channel blockers?
So this QT prolongation.
What is the diagnosis?
So this is QT prolongation.
What is the diagnosis, Roshni? Anyone else? Mind mute everyone, please.
Yes, sir. Abhinay is there online, sir.
Okay, Abhinay.
Abhinav.
This is Dr. Abhinav. This is atrial flutter with 3:1 conduction. So, because this is, lignocaine will be useless here because it is effective only on ventricular tachycardia. Then amiodarone we will not.
Abhinav, first,
Yes.
what is the mechanism of arrhythmia, and what vulnerable parameter would you want to target?
So, atrial flutter is so macro-intent tachycardia. So, this is a re-entry type of tachycardia.
Fantastic. So it's a re-entry. It's a re-entry. So what vulnerable parameter
Yes.
are you trying to target?
We can increase the refractory period so that we can, decrease the length of the excitable gap.
Fantastic. So you want to prolong the refractory period. So what drug will you use? You'll use a drug which is
Ibutylide.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Ibutylide.
Okay, Mahendra, can you mute everyone?
Yeah, there is one more doctor. Janish is there. Shall I?
We'll use the next question for him. Okay, mute
Done,
everyone.
done, done.
Okay.
Done.
Okay, so congratulations, Abhilash. So the thinking was right. So this for sure. Please mute everyone. Okay. So this is an atrial flutter. So atrial flutters are re-entry tachycardias involved in the atria. So we know for sure the mechanism of a re-entry. So in a re-entry, I told you the way of terminating re-entry is either prolonged refractoriness or depressed conduction. So the drug of choice to prolong refractoriness would be a class 3 agent like ibutylide, which prolongs refractoriness to a great extent and works very well. More importantly, it has got a rapid conversion rate, much more than amiodarone. So whoever says ibutylide is right. So how ibutylide works is it is very specific for the atria, and this one, it increases the refractoriness. But again, because it's a class 3 agent, it prolongs refractoriness and action potential duration, there's a good risk of NSVT. So, that's why ibutylide, when you're giving, you have to be very careful because the risk of NSVT is around 8%. Some of them can also develop VF. So you have to be very careful when giving ibutylide intravenously, measure the dose properly, and keep them monitored for up to 8 hours because it's working by increasing the refractory period and prolonging the action potential, the byproduct of which is definitely QT prolongation and torsades de Pointes. So be wary of that. Amiodarone is another alternative. Then you could use it because it works. It works by increasing refractoriness. One very, very important thing, I'm sure all of you have realized this. When you've used amiodarone for atrial flutter or something like that, sometimes the flutter doesn't terminate but becomes slower. You have to realize that the patient has a flutter of around 180 beats per minute. Use amiodarone bolus, use amiodarone infusion. Next day you see the flutter is still running, but the rate instead of 180 is now 140 because amiodarone has got all class action. It has got class 1 action also, and the class 1 action is depressing conduction. So the amiodarone depresses the conduction so much, it slows the circuit. It doesn't terminate it. It doesn't manage to terminate the circuit because sometimes flutters are very, very organized circuits. They don't respond very, very well to antiarrhythmics. So amiodarone might not terminate the circuit, but it might actually succeed in slowing the conduction. That's why the atrial flutter rate slows down. So instead of being 180, you would now have a flutter around 130 or 140 per minute. So as I told you, sometimes, no matter what, many of these antiarrhythmics won't work. And the best option here, because it's a re-entry, you would cardiovert. If nothing works, if this was my patient, if it's a new onset AF or a flutter, I would use ibutylide if the potassium is normal. Give a try of ibutylide. If ibutylide fails, then I would wait for 4 hours. After ibutylide, you do not give amiodarone immediately because it will compound the QT prolongation effect. After 4 hours, try again, maybe amiodarone for some time, or I would directly cardiovert. If ibutylide fails, I would just cardiovert this patient. Okay. We'll go to the third one. 30-year-old with palpitation. Choose the appropriate antiarrhythmic. Amiodarone, ibutylide, CCB, or flecainide with CCBs. So 30-year-old with palpitation. Mahendra, please unmute only the person who's raising the hand. Okay, not everyone else. Okay, mute yourself also after that. Okay.
Yeah, I think Janish is unmuted.
Okay, no, unmute it only when they raise the hand. Okay. All right.
Yeah, yes, right.
So this is a 30-year-old with palpitation. So what is the antiarrhythmic will you choose? Will you choose amiodarone, ibutylide, CCB, flecainide with calcium channel blockers? So we're getting some options here. Flecainide with CCB is the favorite. Flecainide with CCB. Ibutylide, someone says. Flecainide with CCB. Okay, if someone's willing to answer, we can unmute them.
As of now, nobody has raised a hand, Doctor.
Nobody has raised. Okay, then I'll take this answer myself. Okay. So what you're seeing here is, mute everyone. So what you're seeing here is sinus rhythm, and then you have an ectopics here, ectopic here, and then you have a tachycardia. So, this is spontaneous. It's completely spontaneous. You have sinus rhythm and suddenly you have an atrial fibrillation. This is an atrial fibrillation. But in the beginning of atrial fibrillation, you see some form P waves, maybe. These are atrial ectopics. So, you have multiple atrial ectopics. These ectopics triggering off an atrial fibrillation. These ectopics can be coming from the pulmonary vein. We all know in atrial fibrillation, in young people especially, pulmonary veins are the triggers. So you can have some atrial sleeves in the pulmonary veins, and these keep on firing. This musculature within the pulmonary veins keep on firing, and they trigger off in atrial fibrillation. Now, what do you do? What is the mechanism of this arrhythmia? So one, it's an atrial fibrillation, and atrial fibrillation is multiple mechanism. You know, there are multiple circuits inside the heart in atrial fibrillation, not organized at all. So one there. Second thing is pulmonary vein firing. So these ectopics may actually be pulmonary vein ectopics. So the pulmonary vein is firing, and that is nothing but pulmonary vein firing is nothing but automaticity or triggered, more likely to be triggered. So you know, if you use a calcium channel blocker or something, maybe you can reduce this pulmonary vein firing. Yeah, if you use a beta blocker, maybe you can reduce this pulmonary vein firing. So that is one of the mechanisms. So what drug would you use? So definitely there's an established atrial fibrillation. So if this patient, and one way of terminating atrial fibrillation is by prolonging refractoriness. So here there are multiple mechanisms of arrhythmia in place. So it is more than one. It's actually a pulmonary vein firing triggering of an atrial fibrillation. So you can either target the pulmonary vein firing or you can target the atrial fibrillation. Atrial fibrillation is the end product of pulmonary vein firing. So both of these can be at play. So how would you choose? All the options are right. So, amiodarone can increase refractoriness, can silence the pulmonary vein firing, can work very well. So ibutalide can terminate this atrial fibrillation by increasing refractoriness. Then calcium channel blockers are probably wrong. It's probably all except, I think, no? Okay, it should have been all except. So calcium channel blockers, although these are triggered, they are the least appropriate drugs because they, in this situation, they would only control the rate, not restore rhythm. Flecainide is a good drug because flecainide, one, it's got class 1 properties. Second, it works very well for diastolic calcium. It's good for atrial arrhythmias, for reentrant atrial arrhythmias. But flecainide alone should not be used for atrial arrhythmias, especially atrial flutter and fibrillation, because flecainide makes these circuits organized. So some of this atrial fibrillation which is completely disorganized, because of flecaine's effect, the conduction is slowed down, they become organized into flutters. And flutters, if you see, are much faster than atrial fibrillations. So if a fibrillation becomes a flutter, the AV node will start conducting more impulses, and flecainide may paradoxically increase the ventricular rate. So flecainide, when it's used for atrial flutter or fibrillation, should always be given with another AV node slowing agent, either with a beta blocker or calcium channel blocker. So in this situation, if it was to be my patient, I would see how sick this patient is and how intolerant he is to this arrhythmia. If he's if this AF is very, very rapid, new onset, and is symptomatic because of that, I would want immediate termination, and I would use ibutalide preferably. And then for long-term prophylaxis, I would use something which reduces pulmonary vein firing. So I would use a calcium channel blocker, preferably flecainide with a calcium channel blocker. But on the other hand, if the patient has just come with some palpitation, he's completely asymptomatic, he's completely hemodynamically stable, he's not much in trouble, and he's had this episode for a long time, I would not give him an intravenous agent. I would directly give him on a prophylactic dose of flecainide and calcium channel blockers, and I would tell him to come back after a week or 2 weeks to see how this antiarrhythmics work. So that's another important thing. What drug you have to use is also decided by the clinical scenario. If the patient is unstable and is extremely symptomatic and in failure, you need an intravenous agent to bring the arrhythmia into control very, very rapidly. But if the patient is stable and it's a non-dangerous arrhythmia, you can use an oral antiarrhythmic which can build up over a period of time and terminate the arrhythmia. So there's no emergency to give an intravenous drug. So if this patient is absolutely stable and his palpitation is not bothering him too much, you may as well send him home on flecainide and calcium channel blockers and ask him to come after 1 or 2 weeks to see if the arrhythmia has settled down. Okay. So fourth, young woman with palpitations. So this is the ECG. So I'd really appreciate if someone can answer this. So this is a VT, and if you see, this is an outflow tract VT. Okay. So you see 2-3 AVF is upright. So whenever you have 2-3 AVF upright, it is coming from higher above. It's coming from the outflow tract. V1 is negative. It's coming from the right ventricle. So this is a right ventricular outflow tract VT. So what is the mechanism of arrhythmia and what antiarrhythmic would you use? So would you use calcium channel blockers, flecainide, amiodarone, or beta blockade? So someone says calcium channel blocker. So I think the favorite is calcium channel blockers.
Sir, Balaji is has raised his hand.
We can ask Balaji to answer. Yeah, you can unmute. Yes, Balaji.
Good evening, sir. This
Good evening.
shows
From where are you?
I'm from MS Ramaya, sir. Now medicine PG. I used to attend your classes before.
Okay, go ahead, Balaji. What is this?
Sir, this shows a outflow tract VT arising from the RVOT probably because it has an LBBB morphology in V1 with the inferior axis
Yes.
these are usually sensitive to calcium channel blockers. So
No, I'm not asking you. First tell me what is the mechanism.
mechanism is
What is the mechanism? You have three mechanisms. You have automaticity, triggered activity, re-entry. Which of this is the mechanism? Balaji, are you there?
triggered activity, sir.
Why do you feel it's triggered activity?
Because they are usually sensitive to calcium influx. So I
Yes.
was thinking it's
Correct.
because of triggered
Yeah.
activity.
So you think it's triggered activity, and what is the vulnerable parameter here?
The vulnerable parameter is the calcium influx, sir. The
Very good.
diastolic calcium influx.
So what will you use?
So calcium channel blockers would be preferred, sir.
Yes.
Not
Wonderful. Wonderful.
verapamil
Thank
or
you. Yes.
yes, sir.
Thank you. Okay, Mahendra, switch off everyone. So Balaji rightly said. So you can see this is the point I was making earlier. Automatic arrhythmias and triggered arrhythmias will come like this in bursts. So you'll have several bursts. You'll have on and off, on and off. You'll have sinus beats. And this is not a VT actually completely. This is NSVT. So you have sinus impulses in between. So you'll have some sinus impulses, then you have a burst of NSVTs, then you'll have sinus again, then you'll have a burst of NSVTs. So this is typical of either automaticity or triggered activity. It's very difficult to say. So if you have a warm up or a cool down phenomenon, it's more likely automatic. If you do not have, it's likely to be triggered activity. On the other hand, I told you certain arrhythmias have got a preference for certain mechanism. So outflow tract, this is coming from the RV outflow, and we know that RV outflow arrhythmias are very, very likely to be triggered. So the mechanism here is a triggered activity, and you know that problem in triggered activity is diastolic calcium. So you can use a drug which reduces diastolic calcium. So here you would use calcium channel blockers first. Second, I would use flecainide because flecainide works wonderful for for diastolic calcium. So depends upon its arrhythmia burden. If his arrhythmia burden is not huge, only occasional episodes, I would just do with a calcium channel blocker. But if he has got symptomatic episodes despite a good dose of calcium channel blockers, then I would resort to flecainide. And third step would be ablation, or sometimes I would consider ablation even before that. Okay, good. So we'll go to the fifth one. Two more to go. 70-year-old male with the past history of heart disease. So he's got a past history of heart disease. So we'll use amiodarone, lignocaine, magnesium, or amiodarone plus lignocaine. So this is a VT. So we'll use amiodarone plus lignocaine, or magnesium. Yeah, which of this? So Mahendra, if anyone wants to answer, please tell me, okay?
Okay, doctor, I'll do.
So someone says lignocaine. So I think I'm getting responses for lignocaine. Any other responses? Amiodarone plus lignocaine.
Mr. Balaji Abraham is raising the hand.
Okay, Balaji Abraham. You can unmute him, please.
Yeah, unmuted, doctor.
So I'm getting a mixed thing here. Who is it? Getting amiodarone plus lignocaine. I'm getting lignocaine. I'm getting amiodarone. Everything here. Anyone wants to answer? Put him on.
Yeah, there is one doctor, RKS.
Okay, put him on.
Hello. Doctor, you can answer.
Yeah, sir. This is Dr. Ramkumar
From where?
from MS Ramaya Hospital, Bangalore.
Okay, then go ahead.
Yeah. So first, it would depend on how stable the patient is. If the patient is unstable,
No.
then
You tell me the mechanism of this.
mechanism. There is probably an underlying scar which is causing VT by re-entry.
Re-entry mechanism because of an underlying
yes.
scar. Okay.
Yes.
Why do you think this is scar-mediated re-entry?
Sir, you already said that the patient has an underlying ischemic heart disease. So
any pointers in the ECG?
ECG wise, there is a QS in V1 to V3.
Okay.
So I'm thinking probably it's an old Antroval MI only.
Oh, okay. See, the thing is, QS no doesn't reflect the area. Okay, go ahead. Okay, finish it. So you think it's a scar-related re-entry. What drug would you use? What is the vulnerable parameter here?
You have basically an abnormal substrate there, and you have a large re-entry circuit that is available around the scar.
Yeah. What is the vulnerable parameter you would want to target here?
Here, I would want to shorten the refractory gap in the circuit. Tail.
Excitable gap. So that is either by slowing the conduction or prolonging refractoriness. Okay.
Yes.
What drug would you use?
If he's stable, I would first try amiodarone.
Okay.
Because this VT is not very fast for lignocaine to act very effectively.
Okay, then.
And also, I mean, I know you have not given that in the option, but magnesium also would be, in addition, would be useful.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Mind the mute everyone. So as I rightly said, you got the first part of it right. So this is a VT. This is a scar-related VT. And you know, what is the giveaway for a scar is the QR complexes, not the QS complexes. QS complexes do not say anything. QS complexes tell you from where they're coming. But if you have a QR complex somewhere, it tells you there's an underlying scar. So here probably there's an apical scar. And if you see from where this VT is coming from, I think in my last class I told you about VT localization. So this is coming, you know, if you have QS complexes throughout, it's most likely coming from the apex. And if it is 2-3 AVF inverted, you know, negative, it's coming from the apical inferior. 1 AVL positive is coming from the apical inferior septum. Okay, 1 minute, I'll just show you. So this is the, you know, LV. So, you know, if, you know, you have QS complexes throughout almost, so it's coming from the apex. So then you look at the septal leads, 1 end AVL. If this is positive, then you have most activation coming towards here, 1 end AVL. So it's coming from the apical septum. Then you look at the inferior leads. If the inferior leads are, you know, upright, it's coming from above. If it's lower, it's coming from below. So here it should have been the other way around. It's coming from below. So it's coming from apical inferior septal region. Okay, so that's 1 point. So, you know, this is a re-entry mechanism, we know. And in a re-entry, the vulnerable gap is either, you know, conduction or refractoriness. So in this case, I would prolong refractoriness. So I would use amiodarone here to increase refractoriness. Lignocaine will not work here. I'll tell you why in the answer will be in the next question. So here, you know it's a re-entry, you're targeting the refractory period. So you use a drug which prolongs the refractory period or slows down conduction. Because this is already slow, you know, slowing conduction might not help so much. You might have to prolong the slowing conduction works for rapid tachycardias. So whether if you slow down the conduction a little bit also it will work. So this is already a slow VT. So, you know, amiodarone, you know, will probably prolong the refractory period and terminate it. If amiodarone fails, I would just directly cardiovert him. Okay. So this is the 6th one. 60-year-old male with chest pain will use amiodarone, lignocaine, magnesium, or amiodarone plus. So this is the one we discussed. Okay. So anyone willing to answer this? Will you use amiodarone, lignocaine, magnesium, or amiodarone plus lignocaine? Anyone? I'm getting answer for lignocaine here. I would want someone to answer this. Mind way, someone raises his hand, please let me know, okay?
Yeah. Again, RK is.
No, someone else? Anyone else?
Nobody, sir.
Okay, then you put RKS on, okay?
Yeah. No, it's what?
Nobody?
No, sir, nobody.
RKS.
Nobody?
This Dr. Akshay.
Akshay, put him on.
Yeah, it's answer. Hi, Dr. Akshay.
Sir, I am from RJKar Medical College, Kolkata.
Okay.
The patient is having chest pain.
What is the mechanism?
Mechanism.
This is a VT, no? This is a
yes, sir,
VT,
this
no?
is VT. Yes, sir.
Okay.
VT.
What is the mechanism?
Mechanism, sir.
Is it automaticity, triggered activity, or
It is, sir.
DHT?
Burst of VT are there.
Hmm.
Most probably automaticity.
Hmm. Then
We can lignocaine can be used, sir,
why will you use lignocaine?
because patient is having chest pain, ischemia.
Ah,
That may be causing a VT.
okay. So how will lignocaine work?
Lignocaine will increase refractoriness.
Lignocaine, okay. Lignocaine is QT neutral. No, it doesn't increase the effectiveness. Pressure conduction.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Anyway, good. I'll take it from here. Okay. Mahinda, can you mute everyone?
Yeah, doctor.
Yeah. So the first thing is this guy's got chest pain, and you can see the clear-cut telltale signs of ischemia. You can see in the inferior leads there is ST depression. So clearly this is an ischemic VT. So whenever there's an acute ischemia and VT, the mechanism of VT is because of a ischemia can also prolong QT prolongation and cause EADs. So these I told you are short coupled VPCs, which are nothing but manifestation of EADs, early after depolarization, either automaticity or early after depolarization. So you can see that this ST depression clearly indicates ischemia, and you have this short coupled VPCs, EADs, which are triggering off a VT. So in this case, the mechanism would be an EAD related. Second mechanism probably would be an automaticity, because ischemia causes this Purkinje fibers to become, they're partially depolarized and they start firing. So during ischemia, these Purkinje fibers, which are endocardial, are highly resistant to ischemia because they have got endocardial blood flow. So they don't get completely damaged. So they're not dead. They're partly damaged. So they're partly depolarized. And that's why when they're partly depolarized, they become automatic and they start firing. So the mechanism first would be, in ischemia related EAD, early after depolarization. Second mechanism would be automaticity of the Purkinje fiber. So, what would you do is address that. So for an EAD, what you will do is first is stabilize the membrane in both. So you will give magnesium and potassium, or if the potassium is low, otherwise magnesium to stabilize the membrane. Second, if you have to use an antiarrhythmic, you will use something which is QT neutral. Because in EADs, I told you what the vulnerable parameter is to shorten the QT interval. So you would use your drug to shorten the QT interval. So I would preferably use lignocaine to shorten the QT interval. So you got it. So EAD is the mechanism of arrhythmia or automaticity. So you have to shorten in EAD, the vulnerable parameter is the action potential duration or the QT interval. So to shorten the QT interval, so you use lignocaine, which is a QT neutral drug, to shorten the QT interval. There's another reason why lignocaine works very well in ischemia, because lignocaine otherwise, this is the sodium channel. Okay, sodium channel. Many of the sodium channel blockers are state dependent. It depends upon the phase of the sodium channel. So sodium channel is either in the open phase or closed phase or inactivated phase. So most sodium channel blockers, like if you take 1A or 1C, they are polarized drugs. They have a charge on them. So they are hydrophilic. They will enter only through the center, only when the sodium channel is open. Lignocaine, on the other hand, is not a hydrophilic drug. It can enter through the lipid layer also. So it can enter through this, and it can enter through the lipid layer. So it doesn't depend upon the phase of the sodium channel. So whether the sodium channel is open, closed, or inactivated is immaterial to lignocaine. That's why it can enter into the cell inside and can block the sodium channel here. But there's a downside to it also. Hydrophilic drugs can escape only through the sodium channel. So once they enter, they're trapped. That's why they're longer acting. Lignocaine can escape. It weakly binds to the sodium channel and can easily escape from here. That's why lignocaine is not a very strong drug. That's why lignocaine has to be given. You have to have very high steady state levels of lignocaine for it to act. Otherwise, it doesn't work. But ischemia changes everything. During ischemia, lignocaine, which is a neutral molecule, becomes polarized. It becomes polarized and it becomes a hydrophilic molecule. So during ischemia, the acidic pH makes it polarized. So whenever there is acidic pH, ischemic tissue, the pH is low. So in that tissue, lignocaine becomes highly potent. It becomes a polarized molecule. It enters only through the hydrophilic pore, and it binds very, very strongly. So ischemia is one situation wherein lignocaine becomes extremely potent, becomes highly bound to the sodium channel, and its action becomes really, really, really evident. In other conditions, lignocaine really doesn't work. That's why you don't use lignocaine for other VTs. In VTs, because of re-entry, lignocaine hardly makes a difference. It doesn't reduce conduction to a great extent because it easily escapes the sodium channel. Although it binds to the sodium channel, because it can escape to the lipid bilayer, it binds very weakly and easily escapes it. But during ischemia, it becomes charged and it gets strongly bound to the sodium channel, and it acts like a sodium channel blocker, which is otherwise. So, ischemia is a special situation wherein lignocaine works very, very well. That's why for all ischemic VTs, you use lignocaine. And another reason why you use lignocaine is because it's QT neutral. because ischemia, one of the mechanism it causes acute VT is because of QT prolongation and EADs. So since lignocaine is QT neutral, it works very, very well. On the other hand, in this situation, you would definitely not use amiodarone. So what amiodarone will do is it will prolong refractoriness. It will prolong the action potential duration, which will make this EADs even worse. So, like in the beginning of this lecture, most of you said you'd use amiodarone. Amiodarone should not be used because here the mechanism is not a re-entry, and you don't have to prolong refractoriness. Refractoriness prolongation would be harmful here. So here the mechanism is ischemia-related EADs or automaticity, and for here, amiodarone will only prolong refractoriness. That means prolong the QT interval further and worsen these EADs, which are already there. It will make it worsen. So you should never use amiodarone in this situation. Okay, so that's the reason why you have to understand the mechanism, understand the vulnerable parameter, and target the vulnerable parameter. So this is the last one. We'll close here. So 60-year-old known ischemic cardiomyopathy on a permanent pacemaker comes with recurrent syncope. So he's a severe LV dysfunction, permanent pacemaker, recurrent syncope. His potassium on admission was 2.7. Select the most inappropriate strategy: amiodarone, magnesium and potassium, increasing pacing rate, or lignocaine. So he came with a VT. This was a VT, spontaneously converted. This was his basic ECG immediately after conversion. You can see this is a pacemaker ECG. And before you answer, I'll tell you myself that the pacemaker is working normally. It's working normally. This is a his bundle pacing, not exactly his parahesian pacing. So, pacemaker is working well. But, so what is the mechanism here and what would you do? So what is the thing you would not do? Whether it's amiodarone, whether it's lignocaine, or whether it's increasing the pacing rate, or giving magnesium or potassium. What is the one intervention you will not do? I'd want someone to answer this, and we'll close with this. I'm saying someone's answering amiodarone.
No, there is a one, Harnish Bhatia.
Okay, put him on.
Yeah, I'm muted.
So where are you, Harnish? Yeah, go ahead. Now tell me the mechanism. Okay. Early after depolarization. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. What will be amiodarone? What is the state in amiodarone? Amiodarone. Okay. Thank you, Harnish. So I'm very happy with the answer. It looks like people have understood it. So this one, Mahendra, just mute everyone. No, he was absolutely right. So this is a pacing induce. So this patient is on a pacemaker. So his potassium is 2.7. He's developed this prolonged prominent U waves and QT prolongation. His JT interval is more than maybe around 480 to 500. So definitely, and these are short coupled ectopics. It need not be short coupled ectopics. Hypokalemia, I told you what's happening. So this is actually, there are multiple mechanisms. What is the mechanism is? He said it's EAD. He's partly right. So these are not exactly short coupled. Short coupled would follow immediately after the T waves. These are following later. What is happening here is hypokalemia is increasing automaticity. So whenever there's hypokalemia, I told you automaticity increases. So it's already a troubled heart. It's LV dysfunction. So a lot of ectopics keep coming. This is very common in hypokalemia. You would have seen even in normal hearts also. The moment you have hypokalemia, you have increased automaticity. You have a lot of these ectopics. In the heart with the substrate, these ectopics can trigger off a re-entry. So this is actually a re-entry arrhythmia. So the mechanism is first automaticity. So hypokalemia, increasing automaticity of tissue, and those tissues causing ectopics triggering off a re-entry. So there is a re-entry definitely. But the main cause for the re-entry is the increase in ectopic burden, which is secondary to hypokalemia. So you would first stabilize the membrane, reduce these ectopics by giving potassium. You give potassium, you give magnesium, you make the membrane potential more negative, stabilize these ectopics. Once these ectopics go, there won't be any re-entry because he's had a scar tissue for a long time. Second thing is obviously because QT prolongation is there. So you're scared that some of his episodes may be torsades. So because there's QT prolongation, some of these ectopics could fall on the T wave and trigger off a torsades. So you would want something to shorten the QT interval. So if you have to use a drug, you would use lignocaine. Another intervention which reduces the QT interval is the rate. So slow heart rate will worsen the QT interval. If you increase the heart rate, the QT interval will shoot down, come down. So one more intervention what you can do is Because there is bradycardia here, slow heart rate and QT prolongation, one of the ways to shorten the QT interval is definitely to increase the heart rate. So moment you increase the heart rate, QT interval shortens. That's exactly what we did. We did not give any antiarrhythmic drug. This patient came, my PD said we'll give him amiodarone. We said no, because we knew the mechanism. It's hypokalemia, increasing ectopics, triggering of a scar VT, and there was underlying QT prolongation. Could be that these ectopics would also cause R1T and trigger of a VF or a polymorphic VT. So what we have to do is, one, get correct the hypokalemia, increase the magnesium level so that the membrane becomes stabilized, the ectopics disappear. Second, shorten the QT interval, plus or minus lignocaine, or increase the pacing rate. Moment we increase the pacing rate, the ectopics more or less decreased. So, the QT interval shortened, the ectopic decreased, the patient is bailed out. He never had another episode of VT, and we did not give him amiodarone at all. So what I'm trying to say is, amiodarone is, has got multiple actions, but it's not absolutely required. The requirement of amiodarone is probably less than 10%. Most cases of arrhythmias you can manage without amiodarone just by knowing the mechanism of arrhythmia. Second thing is, in many arrhythmias, you need not use an antiarrhythmic. Like if it's an arrhythmia because of a QT prolongation or because of hypokalemia, just correct the hypokalemia. That's enough. Moment you correct the hypokalemia, the arrhythmia will vanish. Just because there's an arrhythmia, you need not use an antiarrhythmic. Try to use the safest antiarrhythmic always use beta blockade, calcium channel blockade if that works. Then go to the next one. Use amiodarone only if it's absolutely required. And always when managing an arrhythmia, use this approach. First, find out the mechanism of arrhythmia. Second, decide what is the vulnerable parameter and correct the vulnerable parameter. Most of the time, you'll be successful. Thank you. If there are any questions, we'll take it. Yes, Sudhakar, anything?
There's one Dr. Saj. I think he has some query. Dr. Saj?
We'll see what is written in the chat, okay? Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Saj.
Please explain how hypokalemia decrease the membrane threshold.
I told you, for resting membrane potential, requires potassium ions and mute everyone, please. Yeah, for resting membrane potential, you require potassium ions and sodium ions. So hypokalemia decreases the resting membrane potential and increases automaticity. So whenever you have hypokalemia, you will have more automaticity. Okay.
Can depressed conduction itself cause arrhythmia?
Depressed conduction per se, no. Depressed conduction per se will not cause arrhythmia, but can perpetuate an arrhythmia. Okay, so many other times, you would have realized in VTs and atrial flutters, I've told this point earlier also, if you give amiodarone, you'll depress the conduction, but that might not terminate the arrhythmia, it might only slow down the arrhythmia. So, it might make it slower, but more persistent. Okay, it can make it more persistent. That's all? If that's all, we'll close. Mahendra, shall we close?
Yes, sir.